What kind of people did the Venezuelan people eater refuse to eat? How much does a lock of Charlie Manson's hair cost? And what were the scariest serial killer's last words? All this and more on this episode of The Infographic Show. 50 insane facts about serial killers you didn't know. Number 50. One of history's most notorious killers wasn't actually a serial killer. Ed Keane, a murderer and body snatcher operating in Wisconsin in the 1950s, has cast a long dark shadow over pop culture. The Butcher of Plainfield has inspired silver screen killers like Norman Bates from Psycho, Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs, and Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So you would think that he'd have an impressive body count. But Ed Gein was only confirmed to have killed 2 people, Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden. All of the other mutilated bodies in his house were stolen from 3 local graveyards. Number 49. The worst serial killer in history was a guy they called the Beast. And that was a title that Luis Garavito earned, as this Colombian serial killer is believed to have killed at least 189 people in the 1990s. Most of these were young homeless people that nobody would look for. Garavito's initial sentence was over 1,800 years, which was reduced to 22 years after he gave up the details of where he buried many of his victims. Thankfully, he died in 2023 before he could get parole. Number 48. One of America's smartest serial killers got caught in the dumbest way. Dennis Rader was better known for decades as the mysterious serial killer BTK, short for Bind, Torture, Kill. He sadistically murdered at least 10 women in Kansas over the 70s and 80s. He used his skills as a home security technician to sneak into the homes of his victims, where he would torment and murder them for his own cruel glee. For years after the killing stopped, Rader kept sending letters to the police, often to Detective Ken Landwehr, taunting them and boasting about his intelligence. In one message, he asked whether a floppy disk could be traced. Landwehr responded through a newspaper ad, falsely assuring him it was safe. Believing it, Rader sent a disk to a local TV station. Investigators examined the metadata and traced it back to a computer at a church. From there, it led them straight to Rader. Nice going, Dennis. Number 47. Bela Kiss pickled at least 23 women and got away with it. This Hungarian serial killer lured in women and strangled them before relieving them of their personal goods. And after killing them, he shoved their bodies into large metal drums in his home that he told others were barrels full of gasoline. Never know when you need it, right? Like many men in Europe at the time, he was conscripted to fight in World War I. While he was away, the owner of Kiss's home thought it was the perfect opportunity to do some redecorating. He and a neighbor stepped into Kiss's workshop looking for materials. They found the drums and inside the pickled women Kiss had killed. And the killers coming up make Kiss look like a pussycat. Number 46. A real-life vampire could only get in if you let him. Richard Chase, a serial killer nicknamed the Vampire of Sacramento, was a truly messed up dude. He killed 6 people believing that drinking their blood and consuming their flesh was the only way to stop his own blood from drying up. And like a vampire, he also had some weird hang-ups about the victims he selected. Chase was a home invader, but said that he only walked into homes that were unlocked. He would roam around and just try door handles, and if the door opened, he'd assume that he was welcome. Speaking of cannibals. Number 45. The Venezuelan people eater was really picky about the people he ate. Doraniel Vargas was a cannibalistic serial killer who killed 14 people and devoured 11 of them in San Cristobal in the mid-1990s. But he only ever ate the flesh of men. He thought that women and children were too pure to eat and worried that eating fat people would be bad for his health. Number 44. A killer journalist got put away by his own story. Vlado Taneski, a small-town Macedonian journalist, committed a brutal string of murders against elderly women in the town of Kisivo. Inexplicably, he decided to report on his own murders and immediately had the police after him because he reported on insider details that they had never released. Number 43. The Butcher Baker hunted women like deer in the wilderness. Robert Hansen, a serial killer based in Alaska, was a sadistic monster of the highest order, killing at least 17 women and abusing many more. But the most unique thing about his murder spree was that he would drive women out into the frozen wastes near Anchorage, where he would hunt them down with a Ruger Mini 14 hunting rifle and his favorite hunting knives. And he is still a nicer dude than our next monster. Number 42. Jeffrey Dahmer worked at a chocolate factory. That's right, the infamous Milwaukee cannibal was employed on the night shift at Ambrosia Chocolate Company in 1985, working for $8.75 an hour. He was working there when he was first arrested by the police in 1982, and then sentenced to 5 years probation and 1 year in a jail with work release. After that, he continued to work at the factory until being fired for good in 1991, likely because he missed one too many shifts due to all the murdering. Number 41. Ted Bundy consulted on the case of an even worse serial killer. During the rampage of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, Ted Bundy offered to help the investigative task force from his own prison cell. Bundy offered an insight into the mind of a serial killer, using his own experience to predict what moves the new murderer might make next. But why? David Reichert, one of the investigators, speculated, quote, "I think he was jealous that the Green River Killer was grabbing all the headlines at the time. Bundy craved attention and control. He was prideful when discussing his killings." Number 40. The deadliest doctor in history killed at least 284 people over 30 years. Dr. Harold Shipman, also known as Dr. Death and the Angel of Death, was a British general practitioner who killed scores of sick and elderly patients to alternatingly line his pockets and satisfy his God complex. Shipman took a thrill in having the power over life and death, and as someone who was often working with vulnerable people who placed absolute trust in his care, he had the ability to kill in plain sight. He was so hard to catch because he was generally excellent at making his murders, which he committed with either tactical drug overdoses or abnormal prescriptions, seem like deaths by natural causes. Number 39. The crossbow cannibal did murder homework for years before killing. You probably haven't heard of Stephen Sean Griffiths, a British serial killer who killed at least 3 sex workers. But the worst part is all of the ignored red flags before Griffiths started murdering. In his teenage years, he assaulted multiple people with a knife and spent some time in jail. He expressed fantasies about growing up to become a serial killer. Then in 2009, he took a PhD in homicide studies at university. And while the police were keeping an eye on him, he was seen buying hunting weapons and reading books about dismemberment. But he still wasn't stopped in advance, and he still took at least 3 lives. Number 38. One Australian serial killer risked it all for a PlayStation. Ivan Milat, also known as the Backpack Killer, was a sadistic outback psychopath who tortured and killed tourists that he encountered in the Australian bush. He's also one of the inspirations behind Mick Taylor, the terrifying killer from the Wolf Creek franchise. He was arrested and put away for life in 1996, but later in 2011, he demanded a PlayStation in his cell to help him exercise his mind. And when the prison refused him, he went on a hunger strike for 9 days before giving up and eating again. We guess he didn't really want that PlayStation all that much. Number 37. Murderabilia is a thriving industry, and that is exactly what it sounds like. People make huge bucks online selling off memorabilia from serial killers to bizarre collectors for a hell of a lot of money. A starting bid of $2,500 was posted on a lock of Charles Manson's hair, and you could buy a John Wayne Gacy painting of an owl for $1,300 on murderauction.com, a real website. Killers aren't allowed to profit off their own crimes, though, due to the Son of Sam or notoriety for profit law. And speaking of the Son of Sam, number 36. The Son of Sam wasn't really told to kill by a demon dog. David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam because of the deranged letters he sent during the middle of his year-long killing spree from July 1976 to July 1977, is one of the most infamous killers of the 70s, and that's a pretty stacked lineup. It was often repeated that Berkowitz was a psychotic Satanist who hallucinated a demonic dog that told him to kill. However, Berkowitz himself would later confess that this was an attempt to throw investigators off the trail. In reality, his only motivation was revenge on a world that rejected him. But somehow, this next motive seems even nastier. Number 35. The Polish skin hunters killed patients for cash. A group of 4 doctors and paramedics, Andrzej Nowotny, Karol Banash, Janusz Kulinski, and Paweł Wasilewski, murdered at least 5 patients with muscle relaxant overdoses in the city of Łódź. What was the motive? They were being bribed by competing funeral homes to deliver patient information, so they could then contact the grieving families before their funeral home competition. It's the deadliest grind set you can possibly imagine. But their numbers are nothing compared to our next group of killers. Number 34. The Angel Makers of Nagyrev were a Hungarian familicide cult. These killers are little known outside of their home country, but they caused quite a stir when they were captured in 1929. It was revealed that they had slain anywhere from 45 to 300 victims. They were all men, generally husbands, parents, and even sons of the group's almost 30 members, and they were all poisoned with arsenic. The mastermind of the group was midwife Zuzanna Farziekasz, who supplied the arsenic to her devotees and talked them into slipping it into their victims' food and drink. Number 33. Was there a real werewolf serial killer in the 1500s? Back in Germany in the mid to late 16th century, there was a series of attacks so gruesome that superstitious locals and authorities thought that they could only be the work of a werewolf. Sightings of a large wolf with a single paw had also been reported. In the end, the trial went back to Peter Stump, a local oddball with only one hand, who the authorities believed had been practicing black magic to become a wolf. They tortured Peter, and when he confessed, he was given one of the most gruesome executions imaginable: death by breaking wheel. But there's plenty more gruesomeness to come. Number 32. The Russian chessboard killer wanted to be number 1. Alexander Pichushkin is a pretty messed up guy. He sustained a traumatic head injury at a young age, and as a result, he developed poor impulse control and emotional regulation. But that didn't stop him from being ambitious, and that ambition was to be the most prolific serial killer in Russian history. He brutally murdered at least 49 people, generally beating them to death with a hammer, but claimed he killed around 60 to 63. And the even more messed up thing, he may have achieved his dream after all. Number 31. A mayor helped a notorious serial killer get away with it. During the bloody reign of Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, in 1985, police got a major break in the case when they found a usable shoe print at one of the victims' homes. They were able to discern both the type of shoe and the shoe size of the home-invading killer, making it easier to narrow him down. But then Mayor Dianne Feinstein made the terrible decision to do a press conference, letting the public know that they now had this information. Naturally, the Night Stalker switched his shoes in response. Number 30. The Shankill Butchers were the scariest killers of the Irish Troubles. Made up of 12 vicious paramilitary killers, the group was famed for the brutal and remorseless killings against Catholics and enemy paramilitaries during the Troubles. Many of them were able to use their connections to escape legal consequences, but their violence came to an end when their leader Lenny Murphy was shot dead in 1982. Our next killer, however, never faced any kind of justice. Number 29. The Stone Man is one of India's worst serial killers, and we still don't know who he is. The name was given for 2 different series of killings that took place in Calcutta and Mumbai in the 1980s, with eerily similar modus operandi. The killer would approach sleeping homeless people and attack them with a large stone. Nobody was ever caught in connection with the case. Number 28. José Antonio Rodríguez Vega was a Spanish serial murderer called the Old Lady Killer. He managed to get away with many of his murders by putting his victims back in bed after killing them, making it look like they died of natural causes. But torturing and killing old ladies didn't make him popular in jail. His fellow inmates stabbed him 113 times, killing him. Number 27. As of 2024, America is number 1 in serial killers. The US has had more of these vicious criminals than any other country, with a recorded total of 3,600. The second best, Russia, by comparison, has only 196. Number 26. The death penalty doesn't deter serial killers. Many criminal profilers and criminal psychologists believe that serial killers are so wrapped up in the fantasy of their crimes, most of them simply assume they would never be caught. And as of 2020, the murder rate in death penalty states is higher than the murder rate in non-death penalty states. Number 25. The McDonald Triad shouldn't be taken so seriously. This concept of 3 serial killer childhood signifiers, bedwetting into the teen years, arson, and cruelty to animals has long been repeated as the early warning signs of a budding serial killer. But this is more anecdotal than anything. While some serial killers have shown these traits, there's nothing certain saying that someone showing these traits will become a serial killer. Number 24. Yugoslavia's most prolific serial killer was an elderly witch. Ana de Pistoia was better known as Baba Anushka, or the Witch of Vladimirovac. She was a self-styled wise woman who made love potions for her female clientele in the early 1900s. She was also, as it turned out, a prolific poisoner. Anushka's poisoned tinctures took anywhere from 50 to 100 lives, but when she was arrested, she only spent 8 years in prison before being released due to old age. She died free at 100 years old in 1938. Speaking of killers going free. Number 23. One of history's worst serial killers was let out on good behavior. Pedro Lopez, known as the Monster of the Andes for his brutal murder of potentially 300 young women in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, is widely known as one of the most prolific serial killers in history. But he spent 14 years in jail because due to overcrowding and good behavior, he was released in 1994. Nobody knows where he's been since. Number 22. There were over 100 people considered suspects for Jack the Ripper murders, including a member of the British royal family. No wonder they never caught him. Number 21. Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder at 18 years old. His first victim was another 18-year-old called Stephen Hicks, whom Dahmer picked up while he was hitchhiking. After spending the night together, Dahmer beat him, strangled him, and dismembered his body. It would be almost a decade before Dahmer killed again. Number 20. The world's first true serial killer might have been a woman from ancient Rome. Locusta of Gaul was the mad Emperor Nero's favorite poisoner. Among what was likely many murders, she's believed to have been the person behind the assassinations of two different emperors, Britannicus and Claudius. However, after Nero's death, she was executed by his successor, Emperor Galba, who reigned for only 7 months. Number 19. The Toy Box Killer had a torture orientation tape. David Parker Ray was one bad man. He captured, tortured, and likely killed a large number of women in a custom trailer he kept behind his home. To save needing to explain to each captive what he intended to do with them, he recorded an audio tape that detailed the horrific things he'd do to her over the course of her capture. He died before he could ever go to prison for his crimes. Number 18. Leonardo Chanchuli turned her victims into tea cakes to save her son's life. Also known as the soap maker of Correggio, Leonardo claimed that a prophecy from a fortune teller foretold the deaths of all her children. And after many of her children did die, she went mad with grief. When her latest son was drafted into World War II, she decided that the only way to keep him alive was to perform human sacrifices, and that's why she murdered 3 women and turned their body into soap or tea cakes. Number 17. Canada's boozing barber used alcohol as a weapon. Gilbert Paul Jordan was a serial killer who mainly targeted First Nations women, some of them sex workers, and paid them to binge drink excessively for his own sexual gratification. Once they passed out, he poured more alcohol down their throats until they died of alcohol intoxication. He was able to get away with it for years because many of the women he preyed on were alcoholics, so it seemed like their deaths were pure accidents. No such misunderstandings could have been made with our next killer. Number 16. Gary Heidnik had a torture pit in his basement. As one of the other inspirations for Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs, it won't surprise you to hear that Heidnik had a deep pit where he kept his victims, specifically to torment them. According to the FBI agent John Douglas, whose career was the basis for the Mindhunter series, Heidnik would fill the pit up with water and not drown his victims, but have them stand in the water up to their necks and then get electric wire and torture them while they were still in the water. Number 15. Amelia Dyer was a serial killer who just went after the young. The Victorian nightmare was nicknamed the Ogress of Reading. She made her living adopting unwanted orphans for cash, but rather than taking care of them, she just murdered them, with 6 murders confirmed but with around 200 to 400 suspected. This murderous career earned her a short trip on the end of a hangman's noose. Number 14. Albert Fish sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims. This guy, also known as the Gray Man and the Werewolf of Wisteria, was an absolute freak, even by serial killer standards. He was a sadist and a masochist who did unthinkable things to his many victims, and after he murdered 10-year-old Grace Budd, he sent a letter to the girl's mother, in which he painstakingly described kidnapping and murdering her. He would later be executed for his crimes on the electric chair in 1936. Number 13. Israel Keys faked a hostage being alive for ransom money. Keys was nothing less than a psychopathic mastermind, a serial killer, robber, and a kidnapper. His last confirmed victim was 18-year-old Samantha Tesla Koenig, whom he murdered after stealing her debit card. Sometime after she was already dead, he applied makeup to her corpse and propped her eyes open with fishing wire. He used this photo of the seemingly alive Koenig to obtain a ransom from her parents before cutting her body to pieces. And if you can believe it, the worst is still yet to come. Number 12. The Ukrainian Hammer maniacs took snuff films of their brutal murders. These sadistic Ukrainian youths murdered 21 people over the course of their 2007 killing spree, and some of these murders were filmed. Local media claimed that the killers were going to be paid by an anonymous but wealthy foreign website owner. One of their tortures and murders, that of 48-year-old Sergei Yatsenko, was released onto the internet under the title 3 Guys, 1 Hammer. This, along with photos of them killing animals and even flipping off the gravestones of their victims in disrespectful selfies, cemented these maniacs as some of the most evil killers of the post-millennium. Number 11. Nobody ever caught the Doodler. This was the somewhat embarrassing name of a San Francisco serial killer who committed at least 6 but as many as 16 murders between January 1974 and September 1975. He had an unusual MO. He enjoyed sketching his victims before brutally stabbing them to death. Part of the reason the Doodler slipped through the cracks was that his targets were all gay men, and American cops in the 70s didn't really look that hard as a result. Number 10. About 1 in 4 serial killers operate with killing partners. These can range from the organized murder rings we discussed throughout the video to the killer couples like Fred and Rose West, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, and Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. The couples that slay together stay together. Number 9. Ever wonder which U.S. states have the most and the least serial killers? According to the World Population Review, as of 2025, California ranks as the top home of serial killers in the United States, with just under 1,800 people having been killed by serial murder in the state from 1992 to 2019. The lowest ranking state in terms of serial killers is South Dakota, where only 10 people have been killed by serial killers in that same time frame. We'll leave it to you whether you want to factor that into your travel plans. Number 8. Carl Panzram was a terrifying serial killer with some weirdly stubborn last words. Panzram was one of the most vicious killers who ever wandered the United States, whose lust for violence and hatred for all of humanity seemed to charge his endless rampage. He was confirmed to have killed at least 5 people for personal gratification, but is suspected of killing around or over 100. In the end, he was brought to justice and sentenced to death for his crimes. As he was taken to the gallows for execution in 1930, he was asked about his last words, and he said to the hangman, "Yes, hurry it up. I could kill a dozen men while you're screwing around." Number 7. One killer wrote a book so good it got him out of jail. Jack Unterberger was an artistic, intellectual type who also loved coldly murdering women by strangling them with their own underwear. After being first caught and jailed for doing this in 1976, he seemed to turn over a new leaf in prison and wrote a book called Purgatory, which inspired a 1988 film adaptation. The Austrian literary community campaigned for his release and successfully got Jack out of jail. He would later become a successful novelist, journalist, playwright, and general intellectual celebrity, all while continuing to kill several more women before later being recaptured. Number 6. The Axeman of New Orleans terrorized the Big Easy between May 1918 and October 1919. This terrifying murderer was never caught, as he snuck into people's homes at night and brutally bludgeoned them to death with an axe. Nobody really knows why he did it, but one anonymous letter that was attributed to him in local papers claimed that he was a great lover of jazz and that he wouldn't kill anyone who was playing the music. Much like the famous From Hell Ripper letter, we can't know if the killer really did write it. But on the night that the local music halls did all decide to play jazz, there were no recorded murders. Number 5. The police thought that Ed Kemper's confession was a prank. Ed Kemper, the gigantic and shockingly intelligent co-ed killer, murdered 10 people, including his grandparents and his mother. He also loved to hang out at the local cop bar, where he befriended many of the officers who were investigating him. After murdering his mother, he decided enough was enough, and he chose to turn himself in. The police thought he was joking, until he provided insider details on the murders that only the killer would know. And then they realized they'd been knocking back beers with a crazed murderer all along. And here's a little bonus fact on Kemper. Since going to jail, he's voiced hundreds of audiobooks for the visually impaired. Number 4. The Moors Murders tape made people in the courtroom cover their ears in horror. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were a sadistic serial killer couple who terrorized Britain in the 1960s. They kidnapped, tortured, and murdered their victims, often recording audio of the attacks so they could relive the horror again and again. One victim, Leslie Ann Downey, had her murder recorded on a reel-to-reel tape recorder. This tape was played at the trial, causing everyone in attendance deep psychological trauma, with many of them requiring psychological counseling afterwards. Number 3. Haj Mohammed Mesfioui was a Moroccan serial killer who's believed to have killed over 36 women by luring them into his shop. However, when he was caught in 1906, he came to a truly sticky end. The local government bricked him up into a wall, trapping him, where he died of either dehydration or starvation. Number 2. The Rainy Night Butcher got caught because he sent evidence to his local photo store. Lam Kor Wong, Hong Kong's most infamous serial killer, was one sick guy. In the course of killing at least 4 victims, he took pictures of his whole depraved routine. The problem was, these were pictures he took on a film camera, and he had the galaxy brain idea to send these off to a commercial photo development studio. Naturally, they tipped off the police, and Lam will never be free again. And somehow, the next killer manages to be even more despicably sadistic. Number 1. Robert Berdella, the Kansas City butcher, loved experimenting with different torture methods on at least 6 victims. One of his favorite methods was having his victims swallow drain cleaner, burning their vocal cords and preventing them from screaming for help. He even kept the skull of one of his victims, later confirmed to be Robert Sheldon, in his closet known as his gallery. Now check out how the Trailside Killer changed the way the FBI hunts serial killers. Or watch this instead.